Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show, Red Pill Edition. My name is Leon Jones, and I hope everyone is enjoying their weekend. It is a beautiful 79 degrees, not hot, hazy, and humid as it was in the early part of the week here in Lafayette, Indiana. And Lafayette, Indiana is the home of my school, the Purdue Boilermakers. But you didn't come to this video to listen to that. You came to this video for some information. And I'm going to give you some good information that you're not familiar with, particularly if you are from the Black sector of YouTube. So what I want to talk about is something that has me puzzled, and it's the infrastructure bill. And as a civil engineer, I want to know what's in the infrastructure bill and why it is so high. As you know, there was a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill passed. Now, the big prize that's coming forward is a bigger bill over $3.2 trillion. That is a lot of money. And as an American taxpayer, I always want to know where my money goes. Now, in this particular video, I'm not even going to mention any party. Yes, the Democrats have the majority, but just like the 1994 crime bill that was basically led by then Senator Joe Biden, Republicans voted for it too. Black leaders voted for it, like your pastors. So I have to take that in consideration along with this infrastructure bill. Now, of course, as a civil engineer myself, I work with a lot of infrastructure. And infrastructure in this country has been crumbling. Now, when I talk about infrastructure, what do I mean? Well, I mean your bridges, your roads, your tunnels. Again, your bridges, roads, tunnels. Now, that's known as I call it your transportation infrastructure. Of course, you have your railways, then you have your broadband, your power grids. But what you guys aren't looking at here is take a look at your gas prices. Take a look at taxes on carbon emissions in the past. And if you put everything together, this infrastructure bill, now don't quote me on this. This is just my own belief. It could be leading to the Green New Deal. And that's what the title of this video is. The infrastructure bill could be leading to the Green New Deal. The infrastructure bill could be leading to the Green New Deal. Now, when it comes to infrastructure here in the United States, the big kahuna that holds all of the money is the FHWA, known as the Federal Highway Administration. Now, the headquarters of the FHWA is in Washington, D.C. And what's housed in the FHWA is you have your DOT, your Department of Transportation. And with the 50 states, there are field offices of the Federal Highway Administration. Now, why are there 50 offices? Well, the object of the field offices in all 50 states, and generally all of the Federal Highway Administration offices are in the capitals. Now, I live here in the state of Indiana, so the Federal Highway Administration field office that oversees Indiana's road work is in Indianapolis. Now, again, I already answered that question a minute ago. What does the Federal Highway Administration in the states do? They basically oversee the funds that are allocated to the State Department of Transportation so they can actually keep up with the infrastructure in their own states. Now, if you have worked for a state DOT, there are different provisions in the contract that you have to understand. And if you're working out on a road project or even a bridge project, you see that there are signs put up. Now, a lot of this work is actually not done by State Department of Transportation agencies. It's done by private contractors. And when I just mentioned the signs put up, well, everything is put up in a way that is in accordance to specifications. Your traffic control that you see out on every highway, all of those standards come from what we call the MUTCD. That's the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And I believe the last version was put out in 2009, and there have been many changes that have come a little later. Now, I know this video should probably be on my STEM channel, but I want to bring this information to the forefront because when it comes to infrastructure, a number of us really don't understand what's going on. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to get right into it so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this is the report card that comes from the ASCE. I'm a member of the ASCE. That is the American Society for Civil Engineers. Now, it is very important that you understand what's going on because what I have here are 18 different areas of infrastructure. Because after 9/11, Homeland Security created 18 sectors of infrastructure. Now there's 16 sectors of infrastructure. And because of what happened on 9/11 with the towers falling in New York, Homeland Security wanted to create something that is going to keep Americans safe. So with the sectors of infrastructure, they call it critical infrastructure. Now, I'm going to go through and give you the areas of what I talk about when it comes to infrastructure. And some of this infrastructure is in the transportation bill. Now, again, my skepticism about this transportation bill is the money going to lobbyists, special interests? Because when we deal with infrastructure, okay, we have our aviation. Now, this is an actual report that's coming from the American Society of Civil Engineers of how your infrastructure is performing. Now, this is aviation in the United States. So looking at it, their grade right now is a D plus. Anything under C is deficient, or we call it structurally deficient. You look at your bridges, they got a grade of C. You look at broadband. Now, broadband is relatively new. Broadband should come under information technology. There's no grade there yet. You look at your dams, that's a grade of D. C minus for your drinking water, so that means the water isn't clean. Energy, C minus. Energy is very perplexing because when it comes to energy, there's where your power is, and your power has your hydroelectric power, your nuclear power. And this is where we're going to get our electric cars from, fossil fuels. That's the one that I'm going to really touch on, because the Green New Deal is going to come from renewable energy. And of course, this so-called climate change. And of course, hazardous waste. As we get into the environmental areas, that has a report of D plus. Waterways, D plus. Levees, Ds. D plus for your public parks. Ports, B minus. Your railway system, B. These are all grades now. Your roads, D. Schools, D plus. Solid waste, C. Stormwater, D. Transit, D minus. And of course, wastewater, D plus. Those are horrible grades. And when there's a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that has already passed the House and the Senate, one must understand how come all this infrastructure wasn't fixed in the past. We put a lot of money in infrastructure, and we still have deficient infrastructure. Now, when it comes to this infrastructure, something that individuals don't know, and I read part of the bill, it's 2,700 pages. It's too much for anybody, but I went down and I looked at the Rona 19. Now, I believe that's in part of the infrastructure bill. And in my opinion, that should be separate. And see, when the government puts out bills, there's a lot of pork. That's why they're so big, and they put language in these bills that we don't understand. So when it comes to the infrastructure bill, you have to, again, look at your gas prices as well. Why are gas prices higher in areas than others? Now, here in my state of Indiana, our gas is from $3 to $3.25. I believe in California, they just topped off at $5. I believe in Illinois, which is a state next to Indiana, some of their gas stations topped off at $4. And when I lived in Pennsylvania, they had added 28 cents on the dollar for a gas tax. And that was all supposed to be for roads. But if you look at the roads, they're still in bad shape. Now, let me share my screen again and go to the bill here. And this is what individuals don't understand. And this is all government. So we need to find out what's actually in this bill. So this article is from fortune.com. And it reads, after months of negotiating late into the night over Zoom calls, a bipartisan group of senators announced Wednesday that it had reached a deal around the major issues on their $1.2 trillion hard infrastructure bill. Now, later that night, the Senate voted to begin work on a plan. Now, while the bill itself may not be ready for another week or so, this agreement marks a major achievement for President Joe Biden, who made a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package a cornerstone of his 2020 campaign and prioritized passing legislation within the first year of his term. Republicans agreed to the plan after meeting with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in his office Wednesday morning. Now, Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema, who led negotiations from the Democratic side, said she had spoken with Biden and that he is committed and excited about this agreement. Most of this text is already written, so she added, that feels good about having the votes to get this through. Now, Biden calls this a big effing deal. Now, why does he call it a big effing deal? Well, one must understand the entire US economy, all $20 trillion of it relies heavily on our infrastructure in one way or another through infrastructure, or we'd say power grids, transportation, high-speed internet, ports, roads, bridges. But much of this infrastructure hasn't even been updated in decades, and delays are causing threats to our health, security, and GDP. Now, in the road taken, the history and future of America's infrastructure, historian Henry Petrosky writes that just traffic congestion cost the US economy $120 billion each year. And again, I just gave you the ASCE report, and that's the report card on our dilapidating infrastructure. Now, in 2021, the American Society of Civil Engineers grades the US infrastructure each year. And here in 2021, they gave the US infrastructure a grade of C minus. Now, what I gave you was last year's report card, a D. Now, you're at a C minus, your infrastructure is crumbling. Now, there's a water main break every 2 minutes, and this is based off the ASCE report, lending to losses of 6 billion gallons of treated water each day. Now, some 43% of our own roadways are in poor or mediocre condition, and about 42% of all bridges in the country are at least 50 years old, and 7.5% are considered structurally deficient. So about 1 in 5 school-age children lack high-speed internet connection needed to access lessons last year. Now, one thing about the US, we are a well-developed country, right? But the question is, how come we rank 13th in the world when it comes to infrastructure quality? And we have fallen behind countries like China, India, France, Germany, Japan, and the United Arab Emirates. And European countries typically spend about 5% on their infrastructure, while the US spends only 2.3% on their infrastructure. So the question comes up, what is actually in this infrastructure deal? Well, the bill is being advertised as a $1.2 trillion massive overhaul of America's crumbling infrastructure, but in reality, it will only include $550 billion in new spending. The rest of the package uses previously approved spending. Now, remember, the House is the one that holds the purse strings. Now, looking at what I see, the finalized text hasn't been revealed yet, but here's what you can expect based on information that came from the White House. When you break everything down, you have 110 billion to fund new roads and bridges. Now, is that a lot of money? Because some states have big projects going on, which could suck up that 110 billion, or at least half of that. Then you get 73 billion to remove fossil fuels to clean energy and upgrade power infrastructure. Fossil fuels, that's gasoline. So you're going to pay for this. Is the power infrastructure going to be upgraded? Because in order to move fossil fuels to clean energy, there has to be some research. So I'm looking at $73 billion. Is that going to go into research? Then you have 66 billion to address deferred maintenance on Amtrak trains, expand service, and modernize rail service. Well, I know the Acela train, that's a high-speed Amtrak train. That's on the East Coast. The Amtrak train out here isn't high speed. In my humble opinion, how many people really use it? How many people use Greyhound? I mean, when you had the Rona, Amtrak, Greyhound, a lot of them already lost money because individuals had to sit 6 feet apart. Now, 65 billion to build reliable high-speed internet across America through broadband infrastructure. Now, who's going to be building the infrastructure? And broadband is not under government. Now, is the government going to pay AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, these big cable providers? Because they already have broadband access. Then in this bill, 55 billion to replace lead pipes and service lines and provide clean drinking water across the country. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Yes, when it comes to your pipes and clean water, you should be looking to upgrade your plants every 3 to 5 years. The bottom line is none of this has been done. And when it comes to bills like this, where's all the money going to come from? 50 billion for weatherproofing infrastructure and creating infrastructure that's resilient to the impacts of climate change and cyber attacks. Now we're getting into something, because this is what I believe is leading into the Green New Deal. And it also coincides with individuals being forced to get the jab, because if you can't travel by way of plane, you're going to have to take a car. But if you take a car, gas prices are going to be so high that you can't afford anything. And so what they're trying to do with these high gas prices here, they're trying to force everybody to get into electrical cars, because now you also have 39 billion, and correction, that was 50 billion for weatherproofing infrastructure and creating infrastructures or infrastructure that's resilient to the impacts of climate change and cyber attacks. Now, remember something, climate change is about the environment. And I know back in the 90s and the early 2000s, we heard a lot about climate change. Now, when it comes to climate change, the climate is cyclical. There are going to be some years that are going to be cold. There are going to be some years that are warm. But we've taken climate change and weaponized it in politics. Now, again, 39 billion of new investment to modernize and improve public transit and improve accessibility for the elderly and people with disabilities. Well, it sounds good, but what are you going to do for individuals who live in the rural areas? Because I live here in Indiana, and what they're doing, they're actually improving what I call the ADA ramps. They're putting up posts for people with wheelchairs. And what an ADA ramp is, it's a ramp, it's got a crosswalk, it's got truncated domes. Now, those truncated domes are about, I'm going to say, 2 feet by 4 feet, and they're for individuals who are blind, so they know they're coming close to the street. Now, that is under the ADA standards. Now you have 25 billion for airports to address repair and maintenance backlogs, reduce congestion, and reduce carbon emissions. Again, we're getting into that climate change. Now, I've given you 2 figures here. I've talked about waterproofing infrastructure and carbon emissions. Think about those 2 issues for a moment. Then there's 21 billion in environmental remediation to address legacy pollution like Superfund sites, abandoned mines, and uncapped oil and gas wells. 17 billion in port infrastructure, 15 billion for electric vehicles, which are cars, buses, and trucks, creating the infrastructure needed to charge them, and 11 billion towards a Safe Streets for All program, which will work to reduce car crashes and fatalities and improve safety for all pedestrians. Now, that is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. Now, legislators claim they want to fund the bill by redirecting 250 billion in COVID relief funds, including 50 billion intended for federal unemployment relief that was eschewed by some Republican governors. They want to recoup 50 billion in fraudulent unemployment benefits paid out during the pandemic. They're talking about saving 50 billion by delaying a Medicare rebate rule passed under the former President Donald Trump. They also believe that they can gain $30 billion from strengthening tax reporting requirements and enforcing or enforcement for cryptocurrency, and benefiting from increased growth from infrastructure investments. So, with all that being said, is this a joke? Or what's really taking place? Now, for those that remember the previous era, and that was last year when Donald Trump was in office, it's funny because he tried to pass legislation so many times over his term, but infrastructure became shorthand and for the magical thinking surrounded by a Sisyphean task, the punchline to which is a punchline to a joke. So over the past few weeks, Trump has attempted to publicly undermine confidence in negotiations. So privately, he's attempted to persuade Republican lawmakers just to stop bargaining. Who are those rhino Republicans? Now, a rhino is Republican in name only. This is why this infrastructure bill, it's bipartisan. So I can't say it's the Democrats' fault. The Republicans also voted for it as well. So rhino Republicans are basically dedicated to giving the radical left-wing Democrats a big and beautiful win on infrastructure, because Republican voters will never forget their name, nor will the people of our country. And this is what Trump wrote on his own personal website. But still, it looks like his influence is fading amongst his former Republican allies. Senator Lindsey Graham has said he wants to get a deal and that he's told the former president as much. Senator Rob Portman has also asked Trump to support the deal. Senator Kevin Cramer commented that Trump's statements were short on specificity. McConnell, who Trump criticized as an old crow for his support of an infrastructure plan, shrugged off the comments. Actually, it's quite an honor. And this is what McConnell told a CNN reporter. Old Crow is Henry Clay's favorite bourbon. Now, with all that being said, why is this being called a hard infrastructure bill? Is something else coming? Well, there's also a much bigger pot of money coming to task. And let me correct, I said 3.2. It's a $3.5 trillion spending package that Democrats are currently preparing to push through Congress without Republican support. This could be where bipartisan infrastructure deal, this is where it could hit a snag, since some Democrats are saying they won't vote for one without the other. Now, this $3.5 trillion package would provide funding for Biden's social agenda. Did not tell you in the beginning they were going to use one to get to the other. And he's talking about support of a historic expansion of Medicare, expanding the child tax credit, providing paid medical and family leave, changing the tax code, taking climate action, and possibly making changes to the immigration law. But here's the problem. In both parties, you have moderates and conservatives. They're not happy with it at all, because you have to remember, all these lefties, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, come from both coasts. People in the middle, they're never going to be happy with it because they don't live I call it the limousine liberal lifestyle. They're not in these big cities. They don't have the money that the individuals on the coast have. And basically all your infrastructure, like your mass transit, is in your bigger cities. Now, Mitt Romney, which I have no love for, he says he loved this bill. He cites concerns about the inflation with the larger bill, but he does support beginning the process. But now, Senator Sinema, he doesn't support a bill that costs $3.5 trillion. Again, that is a lot of money. We already have a deficit now. And in Sinema's statement, it was rebuked by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I don't know how you New Yorkers voted for her, how she got this much power, but she loves climate change. And climate change, believe it or not, it's just another word for global warming. Now, when is all this going to happen? Well, it's August. And this bill passed about 2 weeks ago. And I know why Congress also put it through too. They wanted to go on their recess. And just like the healthcare bill, you got to read it after they put it through. But from what I'm looking at, I see more information on this climate change, the Green Deal. This is when they want more electric cars produced. But in the long run, this bill is going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to raise taxes. and the bill is 2,700 pages. Now, I wasn't going to go ahead and just put that bill out on my flash drive because it could take up a lot of space because I only have a 4 GB flash drive. It may make it, but why would you need a bill for 2,700 pages? And I also believe in this bill, they're going to put a lot more pork in this bill for the constituents who vote for these politicians. Because that's generally what happens in all these bills. Because if you think about it, when it comes to infrastructure, and I've been to a number of states, they're not doing anything to infrastructure. They're doing some paving, they're filling some potholes. They're not really building any new roads. They're adding lanes to existing roads. Mass transit, they're not improving mass transit in any of these cities. The money is going into someone's pocket. And when it comes to government, I'm just going to say this, a lot of these individuals would never make it in the real world because they spend too much money. They have a gravy job that we, the taxpayers, fund. And when it comes to a piece of legislation, both parties are not very smart on actually going back to their states and getting an idea from their constituents about the infrastructure. It's just like the pharmaceutical industry. Reason why they want to keep this mandate going when it comes to the Rona and the jabs is so they can make more money. It all comes down to money. And when you're a politician and you start giving your buddies money, you know you're going to get elected. And again, the United States of America, as much as we are patriotic about it, as much as we say we're free, it's a corporation. Just like any corporation, the people at the top benefit the most. I know we can mention redistribution of wealth, but even when that's mentioned, or socialism, no, socialism is for us on the bottom, but the people at the top keep all of their income. And when it comes to what's going on in this country with infrastructure, people have to wake up. In some areas, like I lived in Portage, Indiana, they have a wheel tax. Some places want to incorporate a mileage tax. Some people are going to raise their gas taxes. When it comes to energy, I believe some of that money is going to go to pay for something in another country. Because when it comes to the government, they're irresponsible. The government doesn't care about us. The government is ruthless. I mean, if you look at Rona, I'm not saying it wasn't real. But I believe they're going to incorporate some Rona funds into this infrastructure bill as well. And they're going to pay their constituents. And that's what you have to understand about politics in general. I don't care what party you're from, it's about the money. And some money is dirty money. I mean, $3.5 trillion. I mean, we're talking about trillion now. We're not talking about billion or million. Trillion with 12 zeros. And for the most part, this country is going to continue to go down the drain. So when we have a bill like this, and I basically had to put this up because for the most part, a lot of what was climate change, global warming, These are environmental topics to see in the bill. And of course, they talk about project developing, funding, and streamlining. Wastewater, drinking water. And here's one that really confused me: environmental justice. Now, I keep hearing that word justice. And in that justice, you have to include disadvantaged communities that are in low income populations. You have to include cars. And in those cars, the biggest one is electric cars. Advanced energy projects. But this part right here, this number 4, environmental justice. That starts to get into the Green Deal. Again, we had global warming, climate change, and then the Green Deal. And see, some of these programs sound good, but they're not good. In the long run, we'll be paying through the nose. So we don't know it. And if we're not going to pay, our grandchildren are going to pay through the nose. But see, a number of these millennials and zennials don't see that yet, because for the most part, they're still living at home under their parents' roofs. Again, this bill contains several climate change provisions, and about 150 million would target clean energy and climate change measures. A significant portion of that funding is focused on low carbon energy, energy storage, and grid modernization. You have to love this because it's going to the Green Deal. And when you're not watching what the government does, they will slide something under the table. You'll miss it because this is exactly what they want. And in my humble opinion, this is a bad bill because roads are not going to be fixed. They're not. I mean, they're telling you what they want. That's all a disguise. They want the Green New Deal under this bill. That's why America's back in the Paris Accord, because infrastructure in this country has been going down for I don't know how many years, 50, 60 years, because it gets old. And when it comes to building a road project or even a bridge project, you got to go through all these environmental constraints, and it takes years, 20 years to get a road built. And when it comes to all that money, that money is not going to balance the budget. And when it comes to government, they don't want to balance the budget. They can write a blank check. But in the end, they always want to keep control over what we do. Now, here's what I'm going to say, if you're interested, because I know this topic, particularly in the Black sector of YouTube, is not particularly popular. And no, I'm not going to spend all my time talking about B-dubs and Black issues all day. I'm going to talk about issues that are important to us as a people. Now, I'm going to talk about white supremacy all day. And shout out to Ramil. He had a good stream. He took it down. But here in the Black manosphere, we have to do a better job at talking about relevant issues. These social issues are always going to be there. They're not going to change. So what I'm bringing you is something that is important, particularly for those who have a job, those who drive. Because I will tell you this about infrastructure. Infrastructure is a big business. And the way infrastructure works, it's somewhat of a good old boy network, particularly if you are in the engineering industry. And I say this, all your big companies like Bechtel, they're going to get the jobs. And what happens after that, you have to go to different cities. Like, again, I'm a civil engineer. The biggest amount of money is going to go into a lot of your urban projects, period. Now, your local projects, they're going to have their own consulting companies, because one trend that you're always going to notice about infrastructure, like I live here in Indiana, so your structure points, your DLZs, your AECOMs, they're going to get all the projects. And if you are a minority consulting firm, yes, the government saves 25% for minority contracts, but the major consulting company has to pay the minority consulting companies. And depending on what it is, if it's a DBE, an MBE, you might get 15 to 20% of that contract. But again, the way this happens when it comes to infrastructure on the road side, and hear me clearly, the money is allocated from the Federal Highway Administration to all the state Department of Transportations. Now, when it comes to the state DOTs, like I live here in Indiana, so NDOT, INDOT is the Indiana Department of Transportation. They're going to take the money and they're going to decide what projects they need to build. Now, what happens in that process is they submit the contracts out to bid to different contractors. Like, I'll give you the name of some contractors here in Indiana: E&B Paving, Reith Riley, Kelly, Milestone, IMI Concrete. You're going to hear those names frequently because it's usually the same contractors that get all of the work. Now, what happens, some of the consulting companies, when the states don't have enough construction inspectors, they take them from consulting firms. So what the inspector does on a job, let's say if they place 100 cubic yards of concrete for a bridge abutment, there's an item number that's on the contract, because a lot of these contracts that are bid out for infrastructure projects are unit cost contracts. So everything is going to be by units, it's going to be by feet, square feet, linear, or we call feet linear feet, square yards. That's how everything is going to be paid. You rarely ever have lump sum items. Lump sum contracts are actually better, but when it comes to a lot of this money that's in these contracts, sometimes you're going to find something that is out of place in the field. You're going to have to fill a change order out. So these companies out here, they give a lot of their money away on change orders. And a change order, what it does, they may find an unforeseen field condition, and it raises the cost of the original contract. And all this has to be documented, because at the end of each road and bridge project, everything is audited by the districts. And then once the district's audited and everything is okay, they put it in a file. And it just depends on what state. They put it in a file for about 10 years. Now, they do that because the FHWA can come in at any time and audit that project, and each project is stored in a project file. I wish I could show you all this because I've been out in the field and I've done this, because basically what the staff does, whether it's from the state agency or a consulting agency or a consultant, they're basically accountants for the money that's allocated to the states from the Federal Highway Administration. The Federal Highway Administration wants to make sure that the money is being spent right. Because in Pennsylvania, there was an incident in District 6 where you had inspectors that were charging time on a project when they weren't there. And there was another company that went out of business. They were involved in it. It's a lot of scandal with some of these infrastructure projects, a lot of money going into these projects. But if you look at it, again, the roads, the bridges, they're still not being fixed. And again, I believe that this is a big connection to something bigger, and that's the Green Deal. Because here's what's going to happen. When it comes to the government, they're going to force us all to get the SHOT. They're going to force us all. We won't be able to get on a plane, and some of us won't even be able to go to work. Now, if you have a business on the side, that's one, like I have a business on the side. However, many of us, we're going to be beaten down in submission to comply. Because when we try to fight, it's very hard to fight, because the amount of people that are going to fight with us when it comes to the Rona shot, they're going to disappear because they become afraid. But you think of this, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, that's also part of infrastructure, believe it or not. It's one of the sectors of infrastructure. So what I'm saying is this: when it comes to any bill that has a lot of pages, you need to question it, because in the long run, if you don't question it, that's going to hurt our pockets, because taxes are going to be raised to pay for some of this infrastructure. I'm not even going to say to pay for this infrastructure, to pay for the buddies who are involved in this infrastructure bill, because who in the world is writing these bills without any oversight? Because again, I'm just going to say this: this infrastructure bill is leading into something bigger. It's the Green New Deal. And all I'm going to tell you is, have your eyes and ears open for any legislation that's being passed. Because at the end of the day, don't question anything that the government does. Because the government is in to keep their power. They're to take from us, and they're to line their own pockets. Because when it comes to government, there's no bigger entity of corruption than the United States government. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 401 Talk Zone radio show, right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And of course, the video I did today should be on my other channel, the Mind of STEM channel. I did talk about critical infrastructure, so you can check out that channel, because on that channel, the Mind of STEM channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and of course, math. And normally I would do a YouTube video and blog talk radio at the same time. I didn't do it this time because I wanted to give you all information about this infrastructure bill. But I do have a call-in number. It's 215-383-5785. Now, if you cannot find me on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, you can always check me out on Twitter, MeWe, and Parler. Now, I do have a Cash App. Now, I'm not begging for donations, but at the bottom of each and every one of my videos, put a little something in the plate because information takes a lot of work to get. It's hard work making videos, but in the end, the videos that I'm producing, I'm just going to give you this education so you understand what's going on with our government and in your own life. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to leave you with this. Be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Always know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And when it comes to all of my videos, and if I say something that you may be offended by, I have to give you this information. If it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. And once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 401 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious afternoon. God bless you. I'm out.